Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, The Creation, Chapter 8, Prayers by Queen Kunti and Parikshit Saved, Text 46. Vyasadyar Ishware Hagyai Krishne Nadbhuta Karmana Prabodhito Piti Hasar Nabudyata Sucharpitaha Vyasadyar Ishware Hagyai Krishne Nadbhuta Karmana Prabodhito Piti Hasar Nabudyata Sucharpitaha Vyasadyar Ishware Hagyai Krishnena Bhuta Karmana Prabodhito Piti Hasar Nabudyata Sucharpitaha. Everyone can chant, please.
Is the screen on?
No, we're looking at the YouTube screen.
Oh, I don't know how to.
Everyone at home, break out your Bhagavatams.
Yeah. How do I'm sharing the screen. I don't know why. Okay, let's see.
Just the other tab is open for the YouTube channel.
There we go.
All right. Now?
Yes, very good. Thank you. Everyone chant, please.
Charachandra Prabhu.
Vyasadya Ishvare Hajnai Krishne Buddha Krishne Nadbhuta Karmana Prabodhito Pita Hasar Nabudyata Sucharpitaha.
Vyasadyer Ishware Hagyai Krishne Nadbhuta Karmana Prabodhito Piti Shayer Nabudayata Sucharpitaha.
Hare Krishna. Vyasadhar Isvarayagya Krishna Nad Bhuta Karmana Prabodhito Piti Hasaira Nabudhyat Sucharpita. Hare Krishna.
Anyone else?
Vyasadhyair Ishware Hajanai Krishne Adbhuta Karmana Prabodhito Apita Hasair Nabudhyata Sucharpita.
Vyasadhyair Ishware Ajnai Krishne Dadbhuta Karmana Prabodhito Pita Hasair Nabhujyata Shucharpita.
Vyashadharisure Hagye Krishne Nadbhuta Karmana Prabodhito Piti Hasar Nabudhyata Sucharpita.
Okay, very good. Word for word translation. Vyasa Adhyay, by the great sages headed by Vyas. Ishwara, the Almighty God. Iha, by the will of. Gyai, by the learned. Krishnena, by Krishna himself. Adbhuta Karmana, by one who performs all superhuman work. Prabodhita, being solaced. Api, although itihasai, by evidences from the histories, na, not, abujata, satisfied, shucha arpita, distressed. Translation: King Yudhishthir, who was much aggrieved, could not be convinced, despite instructions by great sages headed by Vyasa and the Lord Krishna himself, the performer of superhuman feats, and despite all historical evidence. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. The pious King Yudhishthir was mortified because of the mass massacre of human beings in the Battle of Kurukshetra, especially on his account. Duryodhana was there on the throne, and he was doing well in his administration. And in one sense, there was no need of fighting. But on the principle of justice, Yudhishthir was to replace him. The whole clique of politics centered around this point, and all the kings and residents of the whole world became involved in this fight between the rival brothers. Lord Krishna was also there on the side of King Yudhishthir. It is said in the Mahabharata, Adi Parva, that 640 million men were killed in the 18 days of the Battle of Kurukshetra, and some hundreds of thousands were missing. Practically, this was the greatest battle in the world within 5,000 years. This mass killing simply to enthrone Maharaj Yudhishthir was too mortifying. So he tried to be convinced with evidence from histories by great sages like Vyasa and the Lord himself that the fight was just because the cause was just. But Maharaj Yudhishthir would not be satisfied, even though he was instructed by the greatest personalities of the time. Krishna is designated herein as the performer of superhuman actions. But in this particular instance, neither he nor Vyas could convince King Yudhishthir. Does it mean that he failed to be a superhuman actor? No, certainly not. The interpretation is that the Lord as Ishvara, or the super soul in the hearts of both King Yudhishthir and Vyas, performed still more superhuman action because the Lord desired it. As super soul of King Yudhishthir, he did not allow the king to be convinced by the words of Vyas and others, including himself, because he desired that the king hear instructions from the dying Bhishma Dev, who was another great devotee of the Lord. The Lord wanted that at the last stage of his material existence, the great warrior Bhishma Dev see him personally and see his beloved grandchildren, King Yudhishthir, etc., now situated on the throne, and thus pass away very peacefully. Bhishma Dev was not at all satisfied to fight against the Pandavas, who were his beloved fatherless grandchildren. But the Kshatriyas are also very stern people, and therefore he was obliged to take the side of Duryodhana because he was maintained at the expense of Duryodhana. Besides this, the Lord also desired that King Yudhishthir be pacified by the words of Bhishma Dev, so that the world could see that Bhishma Dev excelled all in knowledge, including the Lord himself. Vyasadyar Ishware Hagyai Krishnena Bhuta Karmana Prabodhito Piti Hasar Na Budhyata Sucharpitaha. King Yudhishthir, who was much aggrieved, could not be convinced, despite instructions by great sages headed by Vyas and the Lord Krishna himself, the performer of superhuman feats, and despite all historical evidence. Nama Om Vishnu Vidaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunivadi Paschadate Shatarine. Hare Krishna. Thank you everyone for showing up this morning. I'll just very briefly before I start this morning, when I was looking at the verse again, I started reading ahead in the Bhagavatam, and I started into the next chapter. And I just thought it's so wonderful in the Bhagavatam. The whole arrangement of the Bhagavatam is awesome. But this chapter with the prayers of Queen Kunti, and then the next chapter with the prayers of Bhishma Dev, the passing away of Bhishma Dev, are such a, real powerhouse within the Bhagavatam. These two chapters are so amazing, and Kunti's prayers are amazing, and Bhishma Dev's passing is also really amazing. In that chapter, I guess most of his actual instructions are sort of condensed and summarized and hinted at, because this is the Bhagavatam. It's not primarily meant for instructions for kings. It's meant for devotional service. So that is more about the glories of him as a devotee. But I guess the Bhagavatam has a lot more of those particular instructions, but really just two wonderful chapters back to back, I just wanted to say. So this particular verse today in this particular part of the history is really amazing. And actually, I really found it personally heartbreaking. Of course, of all the Pandavas, Arjuna is the star. We know Arjuna is the star. He's the greatest of the warriors of the Pandavas, and he's the most intimately connected with Krishna, and he's the source of the speaking of Bhagavad Gita. But I always have a soft spot in my heart for Yudhishthira, because he's also a great king and an amazing Kshatriya and an amazing fighter. I think his best weapon, his favorite weapon, was the spear, actually. As Arjuna was famous for his bowmanship, Yudhishthira was a great spear fighter. So he was actually a tremendous fighter and a great warrior. And what to speak of the topmost dharmic king of all. But he also has this soft heart of a Vaishnava, or even you could say the soft heart of a Brahmana. He's a Kshatriya and he's doing his Kshatriya duty, but he really has the heart of a Brahmana in many ways. And that caused a lot of conflict in him, in his life, and in the whole pastime of the Mahabharata. It caused a lot of conflict. So I so much sympathize with that. Even when the Pandavas were in exile, Yudhishthira himself commented that he was much happier in the forest, living with the sages in the sages' ashrams and going from sage to sage and hearing those instructions, that he was much happier doing that than ruling the kingdom. So I really feel for that. And yet, because he's the king, because he's the Kshatriya, because he's the rightful king, this amazing bloody battle, Prabhupada said the greatest battle in 5,000 years, with the amazing, death toll, 640 million people slain, all for the sake of Yudhishthira. And Prabhupada said, and hundreds of thousands missing in action. So 640 million, as we learned back in the days of the Vietnam War, 640 million KIA and hundreds of thousands MIA. And because of that, because he has that, although a dutiful Kshatriya, because he has that soft heart, it was causing him such grief, such pain in his heart, that all of this death and destruction for me, for a kingship that I didn't even really desire. I'm doing it out of duty, but I have no desire to be king or ruler or sit on a throne. That's not even his thing in life. So I really feel for Yudhishthira in this situation. And his heart was so broken by these actions that he couldn't be pacified. Vyasadeva tried to pacify him, preaching to him, don't be sad. This was a just war. This is all perfectly in line with Dharma. You have nothing to lament. And all the Vyas Adyar, not only Vyas, but all the great sages, and all the great sages were there at that time. And he had so many great sages as his counselors, and they were all preaching to him and instructing him, don't be grief-stricken. This was all the will of the Lord. This is all according to Dharma. There's nothing to lament. But his heart was so broken and nothing could fix it. And even Lord Krishna himself, Krishna Adbhuta Karmana, Krishna, who performs superhuman acts, but the superhuman act of pacifying Yudhishthira was something that even Krishna himself could not do. And of course, it doesn't mean that Krishna was obstructed in being a superhuman actor. This is also part of the plan of the Lord. And Prabhupada explains in the purport that this was the Lord's arrangement that Yudhishthira not be pacified, so that the job of preaching to him could be given to Bhishma Dev, because Krishna likes to see his devotees glorified and perform wonderful acts even greater than himself. Just like even in the whole battle of Kurukshetra, Krishna didn't fight. He was much happier to see his devotee Arjuna as the hero of the battle of Kurukshetra, although Krishna could just snap his fingers and have the armies annihilated. But he likes to see his devotee glorified. So similarly, his preaching was seemingly unsuccessful, but he gave the job to Bhishma Dev so that Bhishma Dev could be glorified. And there's also other reasons which we'll get into as we develop this, why Krishna selected Bhishma Dev to be the one to preach to Yudhishthira. So although it was the arrangement of Krishna that Yudhishthira not be pacified, we could still also take it at face value. And I hope, learn a lot from this, why Yudhishthira was not pacified, even though being preached to by the most accomplished preachers of all time. And at the base of this is the fact that changing your mind is a very, very hard thing to do. Here's a rhetorical question to think about. When was the last time you actually changed your mind about an issue of some significance? Just think about, when was the last time you actually changed your mind? And I suspect for most people, it doesn't really happen very often. The tendency of the conditioned soul is this kind of mental inertia, that what I'm doing is right, what I am is right, the way I think is right, what I believe is right, and I'm not going to change my mind. I'm not going to change my ways. We see this, so many examples in the material world, how people are stubborn about changing their minds. I won't get into the whole political side of it, but let's take a couple of other material actions. On a pack of cigarettes, it says, if you smoke these cigarettes, you're going to get sick and you're going to die. Basically, just, I don't know what it is now, but there's some kind of health warning on the pack of cigarettes. If you smoke this, you're going to get sick and you're going to die. And even in some countries, they even have very graphic warnings on the box of cigarettes with pictures of blackened, diseased lungs on the box of cigarettes, or people with brown, rotten teeth falling out because of cigarettes, or people with a tracheotomy with the hole in the neck because their lungs were so damaged to breathe, they have to cut a hole in the neck. And they actually put pictures of that on the box of cigarettes. And yet there's a certain percentage of people who say, oh, well, I'm going to go on smoking cigarettes. So how hard it is, despite, even with the threat of death and disease and a hellish life, how hard is it to change your mind? Or we could look at the example of meat eaters. To those of us who are devotees, or anyone who's a little logical, a little reasonable, a little sense of morality, and you see someone who's taking a cat and petting it and caring for it and buying it toys and talking to it, or taking your dog and you have to take it for a walk 3 times a day and clean up after it. And then if it gets sick, you spend sometimes thousands of dollars healing it. And then that same person says, oh, dinner tonight, kill a cow and eat it. The hypocrisy and the logical blindness is so obvious and so apparent that a person can say, I don't care. You could say, I don't care, or I don't want to think about it, but you can't contradict that hypocrisy. It exists, but people don't change their ways. They say, oh, well, my mother told me. My mother, unfortunately, was a lifelong meat eater, but she told me when I was young that once when she was a child, not a teenager, she actually visited a slaughterhouse. And she said, oh my God, it was horrible. It was disgusting. It was so horrid. It was like a horror show, and the blood and the pain and the suffering of the animals. And I said, yeah, but you're still eating meat. She said, oh yeah, well, whatever. She had no response. She just sort of blinded herself to it. So this is what people do. We're fixed in our ways, we're fixed in our mind, we're fixed in our heart, and even facts and even reality and even preaching an example. What's that verse? Paratax Svatova, whether instructed by oneself or by others or by a combination, we don't change our ways. And so it's very hard. Like I said, very hard to change your mind. And it's not a matter of how smart you are or how stupid you are. A foolish person can be bewildered in this way as much as a smart person. But on the other hand, we shouldn't be too quick to think, oh yeah, those stupid people don't change their mind, or those foolish karmis, they don't change their mind. Because we as devotees, or at least myself as a devotee, and perhaps others, we're victim to this also. How many times have we heard, you're not this body? And then we turn around and we act and we think and we behave and we desire exactly as if we are this body. We're guilty of the same thing. This is a quote from Srila Prabhupada from Teachings of Queen Kunti. He says, a sane man will think, if this hand is ultimately controlled by Krishna, then it is meant for Krishna. This is a common sense understanding. I claim this is my hand, this is my leg, this is my ear. Even a child will speak this way. If we ask a child, what is this? He will say, it is my hand. But regardless of what we claim, actually, it is not our hand. It is given to us. Because I wanted to use my hand in so many ways, Krishna has given it to me. All right, take this hand and use it. So it is a gift from Krishna. And therefore, a sane man always consciously thinks, whatever I have in my possession, beginning with the body and my senses, is actually not mine. I have been given all these possessions to use. And if everything ultimately belongs to Krishna, why not use everything for Krishna? This is intelligence, and this is Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada has spoken like this a million times. I like this. It's a particularly beautiful and forceful present and logical presentation by Srila Prabhupada. So we just heard this. I just read this. We've heard Prabhupada speak it a million times. Yet how often do we then go on and said, oh, here's my hand. I'm going to use it to get something for my sense gratification. So we're as stubborn as that, or I'm as stubborn as anyone else, although I'm claiming to be a devotee. So this is not this foolishness is not monopolized by the non-devotees. We all may have it to a greater or lesser degree. And therefore, it's very hard to make a devotee, because it's very hard to change a person's mind. So that's the karmi, or the aspiring devotee, or the non-devotee. It's very difficult to change a person's mind, to change their heart. So from the side of the preacher, the one who is preaching, and preaching means you're trying to change a person's mind, change a person's heart, makes it such a difficult job. Prabhupada was in a conversation with a professor, Lukács, from Cambridge University. And the professor asked him, how many devotees are you making? How many, are you making a lot of devotees, a lot of Krishna conscious people? And Prabhupada replied, that is very difficult to say. So I am talking to you for the last more than 1 hour, but you have not become my devotee. So we have to spend gallons of blood to make a devotee. Therefore, we cannot expect many number. You have to talk like this for years, then one becomes a devotee. So we cannot expect a very large number. That is not possible. So I really like this. The man asked, are you making a lot of devotees? Prabhupada said, well, I've been preaching to you for an hour and you've not become a devotee. So how hard is it to do that? And this professor, as far as I know, To this day, he hasn't surrendered to Krishna. Of course, Prabhupada is planting seeds that may fructify after some days, months, years, or lifetimes, but it's a long-term endeavor, and it's a difficult endeavor to change a person's mind. You can never find in the history of the world, and certainly in the history of modern Vaishnavism, there is no more successful and more expert preacher than Srila Prabhupada himself. And because his preaching was so powerful and so amazing, he was able to change the minds of actually thousands or even tens of thousands of people who actually changed their minds and hearts enough to give up one way of life of being a materialist and change to being another way of life, being a devotee of Krishna. So that's an amazing potency. But we also can't forget that Prabhupada also spoke to tens or hundreds of thousands of other people who did not, and as of now, have not yet also changed their minds. So changing the minds of a person is so hard, so difficult. In this regard, Prabhupada told a story, a funny story. There was one man whose livelihood was a servant, and he was let go of his job of being a servant in some household. So he had no job, he was unemployed. So he went to one rich man, and that asking for a job as a servant. And that rich man was also a Vaishnava, was also a good devotee. So he went to that rich man asking for employment as a servant. And the rich man said, well, I don't actually have any openings for a position of servant right now, but I'll tell you what, you come to the temple that I support, and you simply go there and you sit and you chant Hare Krishna, and I'll pay you a salary for doing that. You simply come to the temple and sit and chant Hare Krishna, and I'll pay you salary for that. And if a servant position opens, I'll hire you. But until then, I'll pay you just to sit and chant Hare Krishna. So the man came and did that for 2-3 days. Then the man disappeared and he didn't show up anymore. And then some time went by. The rich man said, oh, he's gone. I don't know what happened. So then 3 or 4 years later, he happened on the street to meet this man, and he was pulling a rickshaw. And the rich man said to him, what happened? I was offering you good salary to sit and chant Hare Krishna. And the man said, oh, sitting and chant Hare Krishna, that's a very hard thing to do. I didn't want to do that. So now I'm doing this. I'm pulling a rickshaw in the hot sun in the summer, in the freezing cold of winter, I'm pulling a rickshaw. So even with that kind of support, with that kind of magnanimity, the man was unwilling to just sit and chant Hare Krishna, unwilling to do it. Or even look at Krishna himself. Krishna's preach, who's a Krishna Nadbhuta Karmana. Krishna is the most amazing actor and the most amazing preacher. He gave us Bhagavad Gita. What is better preaching, more powerful than preaching that Bhagavad Gita? But even in that preaching of Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna was offering so many objections, and he had to repeatedly address those objections. And we hear it, and we're not surrendering. And then we read it again, and we're still not surrendering. And 5, 10, 20, half a century goes by, and we're still reading it, and we're still not surrendering. So Krishna is the most expert preacher, plus he's in our heart. But changing our mind is a very difficult thing and a very long-term project. Even when you want to change your mind, an aspiring devotee, I want my mind to change. I want my heart to change. But even despite that on a conscious level, wanting to change and give up materialistic ways for surrendering to Krishna, it's still so difficult and so much internal resistance. We read this so many times. Najayate mriyate va kadachin. Krishna is so expertly preaching about the nature of the soul, and we may remain on the bodily platform. Or he's preaching sukha dukkha samakritva. That happiness and distress, it's all the same. Sukha dukkha samakritva, labha labho jaya jayo. Your gain or loss, it's the same. You win or lose, it's the same. But still we get so materially elated at material happiness and so materially distressed at material adversity. And we rejoice when we win, and we lament when we lose. And we rejoice when we gain, and we lament when we lose. So this is a long-term project, this changing of the heart. Even with the best instructor, even with Srila Prabhupada as your guru, Siksha Guru or Diksha Guru, even with Vyasadeva himself, even with Krishna himself, it's a long-term project. There are occasional, what's that term in Buddhism? A satori, I think they say in Buddhism, when you get like some, flash, like a flash of lightning, a flash of enlightenment. That happens occasionally. I have one instance in my life actually when that happened, and I'll tell that story. It was actually before I was a devotee. Before I came to Krishna consciousness, I was always interested in Indian philosophy and Indian this, Indian that. Even my father, who didn't believe in the soul and didn't believe in reincarnation, used to joke that I was Indian in my last life. But before I became a devotee, I became a Mayavadi. And I actually spent a year in an ashram of a follower of Ramana Maharshi, who's a somewhat famous South Indian impersonalist. And I left that after a year. And I was still pretty dedicated Mayavadi, as much as a, hippie-ish Westerner can be. But a friend told me, oh, there's a play going on at the Hare Krishna Center in Manhattan. At that time, it was at 55th Street in Manhattan. They're putting on a play of the Ramayana. You want to go see it? So I said, yeah, it's Indian. I love it. It's Hindu. I love it. So I went to see it, and just seeing that play, almost like a flash of lightning, immediately convinced me, oh, God is a person. And like that, it was like a flash of light almost. That, oh, God's not impersonal. He's not just a light. He's not just a feeling. God is actually a person with activities and qualities and associates. So that was an instant of, immediate enlightenment. But now, still half a century later, I'm still trying to understand that and integrate it into my life and into my heart, and learning how to actually serve and actually surrender myself to that person. So this is, changing the mind. It's a very difficult thing. It's a long-term thing. So the preacher needs certain qualities and certain abilities to be able to preach effectively. And there are several examples in the Bhagavatam. The prime one I wanted to look at was, who's one of the greatest preachers in the Bhagavatam? Narada Muni. Many stories of him preaching to people. So I wanted to discuss a little this history of Narada Muni preaching to Dhruva Maharaj. We know the story of Dhruva Maharaj. He was a little boy. His feelings were hurt by the harsh words of his stepmother, Suniti, who said, you're not qualified
Suruchi.
to sit.
Suruchi.
Suruchi was his stepmother and Suniti was his mother. Is that it?
Yes.
Okay. So his stepmother, Suruchi, who said, you didn't come from my womb, so therefore you're not qualified to sit on your father's lap. Because at that time, she was the favorite wife, and his mother, Suniti, was the least favored wife. So as a Kshatriya, and also as a child, his feelings were very hurt. And he went to his mother. Oh, and the stepmother said, if you actually want to sit on your father's lap, then you need to perform austerities and worship Narayan, so that in your future life, you can take birth from my womb, and then you'll be qualified to sit on your father's lap. So he went to his mother, who was very sad. And she said, actually, your stepmother is correct. I'm least favored. I'm not even qualified to be a maidservant of the king now. I'm so out of favor. So what she says is correct. Your only recourse is to worship Narayan. So this is someone who didn't even like Dhruva, the stepmother, and was insulting him, but she actually gave some good preaching. And Dhruva Maharaj, it actually touched his heart that, yes, then I should do this. I should worship Narayan. And we know he left the kingdom. He went into the forest to find Narayan, to worship Narayan, to have his admittedly material desires fulfilled. And Narada Muni heard about this, so he went to see this boy, Dhruva, in the forest. And when he first got there, he said, let's see, what's this? He said, this is amazing. Just look at the pride of the Kshatriyas, that even this little boy has such Kshatriya spirit that had made him completely intolerant to all insults. So this statement by Narada Muni is true, but it's also a little bit condescending in a way, that, oh, he's a little boy, he's a Kshatriya, what do you expect from these Kshatriyas? They're intolerant of insults. And he told Dhruva, you're just Kumarasya Shaktasya Kridana Adishu. You're just a little boy interested in playing. What are you doing coming to the forest and doing austerities? You're a Kshatriya, so your feelings were hurt, but you're just a little kid. Could just go back home. And besides, you're supposed to tolerate adversity. There's, just like I was saying, that Sukha Dukkha Kritva, that Sukha Dukkha Samakritva, that happiness and distress are the same. So Narada Muni started preaching to him like that. And anyway, you're a little boy, so go home. And anyway, you're supposed to tolerate happiness and distress. So, don't do this, just go home. And Dhruva Maharaj did not like that at all. In other words, Narada Muni's preachings did not change and did not touch Dhruva's heart. Dhruva Maharaj said, I'm paraphrasing here from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti's commentary on this. Dhruva Maharaj said, yeah, these instructions you're giving, these may be okay for those cowardly brahmanas, but this instruction doesn't interest me very much. My heart has been cracked, just like a pot that's been hit by something becomes broken. My heart has been broken by the harsh words of my stepmother. So my heart, like a broken pot, won't hold water. So my heart can't hold your instructions, your Brahminical instructions. So if you're not going to help me with something to really attain what I want, then thank you, but no thank you. So then Narada Muni started taking Dhruva Maharaj a little more seriously, and he actually gave him proper instructions. Okay, you worship Krishna like this, and those instructions are also very nice. He instructed him in deity worship, he instructed him in meditation and mantra chanting, and he gave him a very beautiful description of Krishna himself with his Srivatsa and his crown and his beautiful dress for Dhruva to meditate upon, and you do austerities like this. And then when Narada Muni adjusted his preaching according to time, place, and person, and actually respected the position and the qualities of the person to whom he was preaching, then that preaching actually took hold in Dhruva's heart, and he took it so seriously. And then we know the history of Dhruva Maharaj, his great success in performing meditation, so that Krishna himself actually came down and blessed him. And not only he got his wish for a kingdom greater than that of his father, Uttanapad, greater than his grandfather, Manu, even greater than his great-grandfather, Lord Brahma. So this is how the preacher works. The preacher has to be flexible. He has to respect the person to whom he's preaching. He has to respect the person to whom he's preaching. And he has to have a long-term view of his preaching. The preaching is always take to Krishna consciousness, but the intelligent preacher has to know how to do that. Or briefly, I won't go into detail, but we could also consider Narada Muni preaching to Mrigari the hunter, who was killing animals, actually half killing animals, and taking pleasure in watching them thrash on the ground in a wounded state and watching them die. So Narada Muni said, at least if you're going to kill animals, okay, you're going to kill them, but at least just kill them outright and don't make them suffer unnecessarily. So look at how he's adjusting his preaching according to time and circumstance. Okay, you're going to kill animals, at least don't make them suffer more than necessary. And then finally, he was convincing Mrigari to give up his livelihood of hunting. And Mrigari said, well, I'm a hunter. This is my livelihood. If I'm not a hunter, how am I going to live? Narada Muni said, don't worry. I'll maintain you. I'll send food to you and your livelihood to you. So imagine that. Imagine a preacher so compassionate that he's actually not just preaching, not giving philosophy or not giving words, but actually here Narada Muni is taking responsibility for the life of the person to whom he's preaching. I'll maintain you so that you could pursue this path of Krishna consciousness. So this is another point, that preaching is more than just speaking words or speaking the right words. We could speak the correct philosophy, but do we also have such compassion that we're actually willing to take responsibility for that person, to actually practically help that person and assist that person in their Krishna consciousness? It's more than just the words. The words are important. The words are vital. Just like Prabhupada said when he was talking about the little child, Saraswati, that Prabhupada, more than once he mentioned this, that little Saraswati would go up to someone and say, do you know who Krishna is? And the person would say, no. And she would say, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Prabhupada said, this is perfect preaching. So it's perfect preaching. She's giving the philosophy, the understanding, yes, Krishna is the personality of Godhead. But the dedicated preacher who actually wants to change hearts and change lives needs to really respect the person to whom they're preaching and adjust the philosophy for the person they're preaching to, and actually have compassion and be willing to concretely help the person to whom they're preaching. So these are some of the points about being a preacher, what it takes to be a preacher, what it takes to change someone's mind. And the other thing is patience, because the mind is generally not going to change overnight. If you walk up to a person, do you know who Krishna is? No. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In one sense, that's perfect preaching. And just hearing that, a person hearing that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is planting a seed that sooner or later will fructify. But very rarely is that one instance going to change a person's heart on the spot. So the other thing that's necessary is patience, great patience. If we give someone a book, if we're on Harinam, if we give a morning class, it may not, make a person's heart change right on the spot, but we can also be confident that a seed is being planted that will gradually, it may take days, weeks, years, or lifetimes, but that will fructify. And that's also a wonderful thing that's going on in the long term. And then let's look at the case of Maharaj Yudhishthira himself. His grief was so deep and nothing could pacify it. Krishna was such a expert preacher. Just look in the previous chapter, or is it in this chapter? No, the previous chapter, where Arjuna is bewildered about what to do with Ashwatthama. That, should I kill him because I'm supposed to kill him? Or should I not kill him because he's the son of a Brahmana? And Krishna very expertly presented the dilemma to Arjuna in such a way that that Arjuna himself was able to come to a perfect conclusion, how to kill him without killing him. So how expert in that instance was Krishna's preaching, that he preached to Arjuna in such a way that Arjuna came to the correct conclusion himself without being directly told what to do. Krishna didn't tell Arjuna, just cut off his jewel and cut off his hair, and that'll do both. No, he presented it in such a way that Arjuna came to his own conclusion. So this is another important point about preaching. But still, as expert as he was, he couldn't change the heart of Yudhishthira. He couldn't help Yudhishthira. Vyasadeva, who's the greatest preacher, who gave us the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Vedas, what bigger better, more effective preaching is that than giving the Vedas? Because the Vedas is the basis of all of our preaching. So it still didn't touch Yudhishthira. So for a variety of reasons, Krishna arranged that Yudhishthira was preached to by Bhishma Dev. Now, as I said, and as Prabhupada said in the purport, he arranged that so that Bhishma Dev would be glorified even above Krishna himself. But there's other reasons why, practical reasons why. There was no one more dear to Yudhishthira than Bhishma Dev. So intimately connected in such a bond of love and familial love and friendship and respect between them, between Yudhishthira and Bhishma Dev. Prabhupada says in the purport that Bhishma Dev cared for the childless Pandavas, and there was such love and concern and respect between them that that quality makes Bhishma Dev the perfect person to preach to Yudhishthira. In last week's verse, I mentioned that one of the qualities of sadhu sangha, or the essence of sadhu sangha, is swajati asya snigdha. That sadhu sangha especially means associating with someone who is like you in your group, in your class, or who is like you, or who shares a lot with you, and snigdha, who is very affectionate to you. So this also makes preaching very effective when it's a person with whom you actually have an intimate relationship and who you sincerely care about. This makes preaching very potent. Another reason why Krishna chose Bhishma Dev is that Bhishma Dev, and specifically Bhishma Dev's death, because remember, he's lying on the battlefield on a bed of arrows, about to die, waiting to die by his own will. And the death of Bhishma Dev actually symbolizes, it's the essence of all of Yudhishthira's grief, his grief at the killing of these 640 million people. But what hurts more of that 640 million than the death of Bhishma Dev himself, who was his guru, his grandfather, his well-wisher. So having that person who is at the center of Yudhishthira's grief preach to him to not grieve. Again, this is a very powerful and intelligent choice by Krishna to have this person preach to Yudhishthira. And again, Bhishma Dev knew Yudhishthira better than anyone. Again, this sajati asya snigdha. He was the most closely associated with him, actually knew him better than anyone. Bhishma Dev, from his very childhood, he knew him. Therefore, he knew the best way to reach his heart, to reach his mind and his heart, and to touch his heart and change his heart in this way. So this is some of the things that we as preachers should know. Any preaching and every bona fide preaching is beneficial, whether it's distributing books or Harinam, or meeting someone at the Sunday feast, or meeting someone at work and telling them something about Krishna consciousness is always perfect and always valuable. But if we could have this kind of relationship of genuine compassion and actually intimacy with the person to whom we're preaching, and friendship and caring about them, and be actually willing to respect them and invest in them, this kind of preaching is so powerful. And this is the kind of preaching that is most effective at changing hearts, at changing minds. So again, to summarize, that changing is hard and growth is hard. Inertia is our default state for many, many lifetimes. And we justify in ourselves, we justify that resistance. I'm okay, I'm right, and you're wrong. Whatever I do is fine. We justify that. And when someone else is unwilling to change, then we become angry. We justify our own inertia, but we get angry at the inertia of others. But actually, the principle of the preacher is just the opposite of that, that he does not tolerate his own inertia. He wants his own heart and mind to change from a materialist to being a lover and servant of Krishna. And he's tolerant of the inertia in others, and patiently and steadfastly goes on preaching, spreading the message of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the message of Srila Prabhupada. And we have to genuinely care about the person, like Bhishma Dev cared about Yudhishthira. Sometimes a devotee can see preaching as a battle, or as, oh, I smashed him, or oh, I was right, or this is a common thing, oh, I defeated him. So it's not, we don't want to just necessarily defeat someone. We want to actually change their heart, change their mind, make them a devotee of Krishna. In summary, here's one verse, nice verse from Chaitanya Charitamrita. This is from the Adi Leela, Lord Chaitanya in 5 features, and the story is told of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu preaching to the Mayavadi sannyasis. Who is more offensive? Who is more blind to reality, blind to actual philosophy, and blind to devotional service than a Mayavadi sannyasi? There's practically nothing lower than that, to be a Mayavadi sannyasi, a follower of Shankaracharya. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu preached to them. And in text 150 of that chapter, he says, E mate tan sabara kshami aparada, sabakare Krishna nama karila prasad. Thus, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu excused all the offenses of the Mayavadi sannyasis and very mercifully blessed them with Krishna nama. So he overlooked their offenses and blessed them with the holy name. A little bit from the purport, Prabhupada says, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the mercy incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is addressed by Srila Rupa Goswami as Mahavadyan Avatar, or the most magnanimous incarnation. Going on, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu teaches us that those whom preachers meet are almost all offenders who are opposed to Krishna consciousness. But it is a preacher's duty to convince them of the Krishna consciousness movement and then induce them to chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Our propagation of the Sankirtan movement is continuing despite many opponents. And people are taking up this chanting process even in remote parts of the world. We should follow very respectfully in the footsteps of Lord Chaitanya, and there is no doubt that we shall be successful in our attempts. One final, this is getting late, but one final little point I wanted to make. As I said, it's very hard to change our mind, to change our hearts. But we're able to, because Krishna has endowed us with free will. Krishna is, again, Krishnena Adbhuta Karmana. Krishna is the performer of amazing activities. He is all powerful. There's nothing that can limit Krishna's power or Krishna's reach or Krishna's ability or Krishna's influence. But there's one aspect of the universe, one aspect of creation where Krishna has, in a sense, surrendered his controlling power. And that is by granting his parts and parcels, living entities, with free will. He's given us that free will. So in one sense, that aspect of our lives is outside of Krishna's power. Of course, nothing is, in an absolute sense, nothing is outside Krishna's power. And that granting of free will is also part of Krishna's will. But still, he's given us the ability to surrender or to not surrender. Therefore, Krishna, as the most powerful Supreme Personality of Godhead, possessor of all opulences, he can have anything and everything. He can do anything and everything with no effort. He doesn't even have to snap his fingers. That's more effort than is necessary. He creates the whole creation, the whole universe, while he's asleep. We have this expression, oh, that's so easy, I could do it in my sleep, right? So Krishna is creating the universe in his sleep. He's lying down, and not even personally, by his expansion of Mahavishnu, who is lying down sleeping, and the universes are simply coming out of his body with no endeavor. So Krishna can have anything and everything, but there's that one thing that he has surrendered his power for and left outside of his will. And that is our free will. That is why devotional service is the most precious thing in this world. And to Krishna himself, the most precious thing, so much above any of his worldly power of the material and spiritual worlds. He's attracted by devotional service for this very reason. It's the one thing out of his control. So therefore, it's so valuable and so precious to him. So how much should we value both for ourselves, that we should be willing and trying to our utmost ability to change our hearts and minds, and also to encourage others to change their hearts and minds, because this is the highest gain. Prema Pamartha Mahan, that's what it means, that it's the most valuable thing, love of Krishna, for this reason, because Krishna has surrendered that ability to us, to our free will. Hare Krishna, thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Is there any comment or discussion?
Anybody has any questions or comments, please just unmute yourself. And
Yes, Jonah's hand is up. Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
I just wanted to say this is a very helpful class. Thank you
Yes,
very much.
But did it change your heart?
It definitely made me think. Yeah, I mean, it was very, very just pointing out that in the world, I guess the stubbornness and just really making it apparent, and the reluctancy. It just seems, I mean, all facets of life, and even in our devotional lives and our devotional communities, the reluctancy to, I don't know what it is, because everybody's their own individual person, so they're driven by their own motives and they have their own reasonings and their own conditions. But it's almost like this fear of, I may be, of showing a weakness, that I may be wrong.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to change my mind. That means I was wrong, and therefore that means I'm vulnerable. I'm exposed. So there's like this facade, this sense of trying to save face, it's. I don't think in any realm it's good, but even in our devotional communities, our devotional lives, specifically in our devotional lives, when we try to protect this kind of false sense of self, because if we're not our bodies, we're also not our minds. How, I mean, is it driven by pride? Is it driven by? I mean, is that what's driving it? Is like a sense of just like pride to protect our false sense of self? Is that, if we had to get to the bottom of it, how would we get to the bottom of it to be able to correct it?
Yeah, that's a really good point and a really good question. And I can't say what is, at the one base factor that's at the bottom of it. I'm not sure I could say that. But yeah, this idea of pride, of false, we say ahankara or false ego. False ego means pride, and it also means just, not knowing who you really are. So this pride, this fear of being wrong, the fear of admitting that you're wrong, this is a really important, I think, part of it, just the psychology of why we're unwilling to change. That being willing to change means being willing to accept that where I am at right now is not correct, or is not where I should be. So there's a big investment of false ego in that. That's why humility is such an important part of devotional service, for that reason. That humility means being willing to accept that I'm wrong, and to be right, I need to change. So that's a hard thing. That's why, what's that? Guru More Mukha Deke Karila Shashan, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that I always considered myself a fool before my spiritual master. Because if you present yourself before the spiritual master thinking you're very wise and very intelligent, then that means I'm already so wise and intelligent. What need is there to change? I'm already rightly situated. But if you're a fool, not just being a fool, but being actually willing to admit that you're a fool, means that, that, okay, so how do I change so I'm not a fool? So always considering yourself a fool, always having that humility, that willingness to accept that you're wrong is vital. And I think that's a really good analysis and really important point, a really important part of this whole equation. Thanks for that. Anything else, question
Thank you,
or comment? Is that okay, Jonah Prabhu?
No, thank you very much, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Yesterday I was listening to my Guru Maharaj give, we had a little disciple Sangha, and he was talking about how to get along with people that you don't get along with. And one of the things, the difficulty is always, am I being a doormat or am I making my case, But I think a lot of times, even if it is not what we like, what we want, we have to be able to do it. It's not always a question of right or wrong. Sometimes there are two options, two different choices. Neither one is particularly wrong or bad. They're two different. I like red, you like green. Which one is bad or wrong? You need to tolerate it. If the other color choice wins, you have to, So there are just so many different aspects. And one thing I was thinking as you were giving class is how much effort and energy it takes for us to look within. I mean, it's tiring. It is really, it is.
Yeah, it's practically speaking the hardest thing. It's so easy to look outward. We have eyes here in the front of our head, and we're always looking outward, and we're always seeing what this person is doing wrong, or what this person is doing wrong, or what this person is doing wrong. That's why Krishna says that the real knowledge is within, real happiness is within, and that's a hard thing to look within, and especially to look within and see what's wrong within. But yeah, that's really important, and that kind of looking within and that kind of honesty with yourself is absolutely vital. Yeah. And like you said, also tolerating, to at least to an appropriate degree, tolerating the differences in others, not thinking that my way is the only way, my understanding is the only understanding of what people say, my way or the highway. So we can appreciate not that anything and everything is always good or always acceptable. There are boundaries. But within Krishna consciousness, someone will preach this way, someone will preach that way, someone will like deity worship, someone will like book distribution. Just like in the old days when book distribution was very prominent. But sometimes book distributors would give classes in which they would denigrate other services. So this is a misunderstanding.
Yes.
That we can appreciate book distribution as a glorious service, or even as the most glorious service, without denigrating other services. So we can appreciate all varieties of preaching and all varieties of devotees and all varieties of devotional service. In one of his seminars, Jai Advaita Maharaj was saying that sometimes devotees are eccentric or unusual. And he says, and we accept that. I said we would much rather befriend the unusual or the eccentric devotee than the upright, well-adjusted karmi. So we have to be willing to interact properly with everyone, including the materialists and including the devotees, but especially within our society, this open-mindedness, this acceptance, as long as we maintain Prabhupada's standards, is a really important thing. I like that point. Because preaching is not just preaching to the non-devotees, but preaching is also preaching to the devotees. Anything else? Last question or comment?
everybody, I think, is looking within. It's, it's definitely.
Maybe even I will. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Announcements.
Yes. Again, thank you, Acharya Prabhu. A very enlightening class, very thought-provoking, and I think very helpful for all the devotees here to apply this, what you've given us. Today we have, starting at 12 o'clock, we're going to have kind of an extended kirtan program. Starting at 12 o'clock, we'll go all the way to the Sunday feast. And tonight's Sunday feast, the lecture, as we prepare for Gaura Purnima, it'll be on Lord Chaitanya liberating Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, and it'll be given by His Grace Vishnu Gada Prabhu. So we hope to see you tonight, as well as if you can make it for the kirtan at some point throughout the day.
That should be good. That pastime has some amazing preaching techniques by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So you can see how he really preached how to preach to a big puffed up scholar. It was very good.
Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya changed his position.
Yeah. Actually, very extremely he changed. That's a good pastime. Good thing to hear tonight.
Okay. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone have a good